Live from London, this is BBC News. Leaders of EU countries vow to stand by Ukraine, pledging to boost defence spending after Washington freezes its military assistance to Kyiv.
This is a watershed moment for Europe. And Ukraine is part of our European family. It's also a watershed moment for Ukraine.
Meanwhile, Russia hits out at Keir Starmer's plan for British troops to form part of any peacekeeping force if there's a ceasefire. Our other headlines, scientists discover a part of the immune system. They say it could be a goldmine of new antibiotics.
Trump cards are shining bright, golden future, a brand new life.
And after the global controversy sparked by Donald Trump reposting an AI-generated vision of Gaza, which went viral, we'll talk live to its creator. Hello and welcome to BBC News. European leaders have promised to stand by Ukraine as they hold an emergency summit to discuss defence spending in the face of a major shift in US security policy. Arriving for the talks in Brussels, Ukraine's President Zelensky said he was thankful his country was not alone at what's being described as a watershed moment. Poland's Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, insisted Europe was capable of winning any military or economic confrontation with Russia. Here's our diplomatic correspondent, Caroline Hawley.
They've come together again, another meeting, a mood of crisis, as Donald Trump continues to upend the global status quo. The aim is to work out how best to support Volodymyr Zelensky under pressure from the US to make peace on President Trump's terms and to boost Europe's own defences. The stakes are high, not just for him, but for the continent.
This is a watershed moment for Europe. And Ukraine is part of our European family. It's also a watershed moment for Ukraine. Europe faces a clear and present danger. And therefore Europe has to be able to protect itself, to defend itself, as we have to put Ukraine in a position to protect itself and to push for lasting and just peace.
We are very thankful that we are not alone, and these are not just words, we feel it. It's very important. You made a strong signal to Ukrainian people, to Ukrainian warriors, to civilians, to all our families.
Overnight, President Zelensky's hometown came under Russian attack. Rescue workers helping the injured after a missile hit a 5-story hotel. Strikes from Russia will be harder to prevent now that the US has suspended its intelligence sharing with Kyiv. All American military aid has also been halted. So if and when the fighting ends, how should Europe help secure the peace and protect itself in the future? In Brussels, they're talking about big increases in defence spending because they can no longer rely on American support.
Qui peut donc croire?
Last night, President Macron of France, in an address to his nation, spoke of a turning point in European history. He warned the French people that the threat from Russia didn't stop at Ukraine, that for years to come it could endanger Europe and France. He said France, the EU's only nuclear power, was considering extending the deterrence of its arsenal to European allies, prompting a furious response from Moscow. The Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, said that President Macron's words were a threat to Russia. Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine and now Donald Trump's attempts to end it have brought the world to what Keir Starmer has called a crossroads in history. Europe trying to work out how best to respond. Caroline Hawley, BBC News.
Well, let's get more from the summit. The message from senior EU officials and other leaders as they arrived there a little earlier was one of unity and the need to step up to defend Ukraine and the rest of Europe.
I think I'll be a little bit more blunt than usual today, and our message on this day of a special European Council on Defence is that it is about damn time. This is something that we have been asking for a long time, that the European Union, that Europe is capable of standing up on its own 2 feet. That's why we've been saying we need to scale up, we need to be prepared, we need to produce, and we need to protect.
Obviously, we are living in times which are quite historical because our traditional allies changed their position. We are in front of a situation which is difficult in Europe, and so therefore I think it's important today, if you feel that history is moving fast, that Europe gets its act together for more competitiveness, more defense, more for Ukraine, and I think those three topics should be on the agenda today, and we should be more united than ever.
We're going to discuss defense and what we can do to really boost our own defense. So all the options are on the table when it comes to financing of the defense, from grants to reallocation of the cohesion funds to also the change of fiscal rules. And I think this has been long pushed for. This is extremely important because we really need to invest more in defense. And second, of course, Ukraine. What more can we do to support Ukraine?
The US have been our most important ally since the end of the Second World War, and we are not going to change that. But the Americans are, there are some insecurity now about how US is going to act in the future, and therefore for me the most important thing is to do what is needed in Europe, and to rearm our continent is by far the most important thing. Thank you.
Well, listening to all that is our Europe correspondent Nick Beake. He's there at the summit, and he explained a little more about the difficulties those European leaders find themselves in.
The warm words, the hugs, the smiles, it was a world away, wasn't it, from the scenes in the White House not even a week ago, and the treatment that President Zelensky got there. But of course that sort of choreography is the easy part, because they are really in a difficult situation now, these European leaders. They're talking about how can they fill any sort of void left by the Americans not giving military support and not sharing intelligence with the Ukrainians. They're also, as we heard there, thinking about how they can massively ramp up defence spending for the continent. But, you know, you can't just magic up tanks and machine guns and other weapons overnight. So this is a really pressing matter. EU leaders are here today. We'll have to see what exactly they agree on. It's worth stressing, of course, that there are lots and lots of different things going on at the moment. Notably, in London, you've got Sir Keir Starmer. Of course, with the UK not being part of the EU anymore, he is talking about this coalition of the willing. If there is a truce or a ceasefire in the future, that there could be troops on the ground.
Well, that was Nick Beake. Let's pick up with that final point that Nick was saying, because a UK official says around 20 countries, mostly European and Commonwealth nations, have expressed interest in contributing to that so-called coalition of the willing to support Ukraine, that coalition that Keir Starmer has been talking about. Well, our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, told us how Moscow was reacting to that idea.
Well, actually, for weeks now, Russian officials have been rejecting the idea of a European peacekeeping force in Ukraine, basically arguing that that would mean NATO in Ukraine via the back door. So earlier today, I had the chance to ask Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, at an event in Moscow, whether that's still the case. Does Russia still oppose this, or was there any room for compromise? And he basically said, no room at all for compromise here at all, because he said whatever flag a European peacekeeping force would fly under, whether it's an EU flag or whether it's under the flags of nation states, Moscow would see these as NATO troops from NATO countries on Russia's doorstep. And then came what sounded like a threat. He said that if this happened, then Russia would see this no longer as a hybrid involvement, but the direct, official and unconcealed participation of NATO countries in the war against Russia. In other words, NATO against Russia. So he said that we mustn't let that happen. We should point out, though, that when Moscow talks about the war against Russia, we shouldn't forget that 3 years ago it wasn't NATO invading Russia or Europe invading Russia. It was Russia that launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Interestingly, one Russian newspaper, a pro-Kremlin paper today, suggested that some compromise could be peacekeepers from non-European nations.
Steve Rosenberg in Moscow. Let's go straight to Westminster and our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus. And Damien, immediately you see the problem, Keir Starmer developing the plan if we get to the point of a ceasefire, but already Moscow pushing back hard.
Yes, but I think what's worth saying are a couple of things. The first is that I think it's very important position of the European countries, the UK, is that Russia does not set the terms for what happens here. They're very clear that Ukraine is the country that has been attacked. Russia talks about other nations, that European countries, by stepping up support for Ukraine, are warmongering. What the European view very much is that Russia is talking about that, but it's Russia that's firing missiles into Ukrainian cities right now, and that it's Ukraine as the aggressed country, as the victim, that needs to have a say in this, and that they will back that up. So that's the first thing. They don't want Russia to be setting the terms. Number two is that what's under discussion here, I think it was sort of the terminology perhaps is running ahead of what's actually on the table. Now, what is on the table and being discussed behind closed doors, we don't have much detail at all. It doesn't seem that it is peacekeeping troops as such. What the UK has spoken about is a sort of reassurance force, one that wouldn't necessarily be patrolling front lines if it came to any peace deal, but would be further back. And all we know today is that the UK has said that a meeting happened yesterday where 20 countries, officials from 20 countries, took part discussing this idea. So, I mean, that's the kind of background to all of that. But in the meantime, what the UK and obviously European nations in Brussels say is the important thing is to keep stepping up support for Ukraine to ensure it is in a strong position, and particularly through all this mobilisation of finance and investment. And Keir Starmer was talking about that today. This is what he said.
The announcement I made last week was the highest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War, going to 2.5% by 2027, so a much shorter time frame than I think most people envisaged, and then the ambition to go on beyond that to 3% in the next Parliament. So that is the highest sustained increase, and that is important for our security, for our defence, for our capability. And the first duty of the Prime Minister is to keep the country safe, and I take that duty very, very seriously. But it is also an opportunity for jobs in Britain.
Well, that was Keir Starmer earlier. Damien, just a brief thought about what the French were saying only yesterday, the possibility of the French Emmanuel Macron going with Keir Starmer and President Zelensky back to the White House, perhaps as early as next week. Are you hearing anything more about that?
I mean, I have to say here, the government sources here playing down that sort of idea, saying that there's no plans for that at this stage. I mean, it's a possibility you could envisage that perhaps the Europeans might want to be there in order to provide sort of reassurance, to be there to, as they want to be at the heart of the discussions and helping to shape this, because they view this as critical to European security and want to be backing Ukraine and, as I was saying earlier, want Ukraine and its views to be central to anything that is discussed and any outcome.
Damien, thanks very much. As Damien was speaking, just one line coming from Russia's Vladimir Putin saying we have to choose the peace which is suitable for Russia. So that's the latest line from Moscow. Plenty more from the summit in a moment or two. And here on the programme in the next few minutes, we'll be talking to the former UK Defence Secretary, Sir Michael Fallon. He's here in the studio with me. So plenty more on this, the story that is dominating today's agenda. Around the world and across the UK, you are watching BBC News. Welcome back to BBC News. Let's pick up where we left off. I was just telling you the first few lines of the recent statements from Vladimir Putin. Just one more to add to it. I told you that he'd said we have to choose the peace which is suitable for Russia. He has also just said, when he was asked if Russia would treat, he said in one word, we will not. 3 words, actually. So let's talk to the former UK Defence Secretary, Sir Michael Fallon. He's here in the studio with me. Michael, welcome here to the programme. Let's take it in stages. This summit, we've heard from Macron, Starmer, von der Leyen, all saying similar things. We are at a crossroads moment, aren't we?
Yes, and that's because of what President Trump has done. He's forced Europe to actually face reality, because Ukraine clearly can't repel this invasion on their own. They're not going to win this war on their own. If they don't have American help, they must have more European help. And either way, Europeans have got to be involved somehow in any agreement that is reached. Otherwise, there's a spillover effect on the eastern side of Europe. Other countries are at risk.
You were Defence Secretary around that time that Putin invaded Crimea. Are European leaders right when they say now, and President Zelensky as well, that any peace deal has to have US security guarantees? Without that, there's a danger of Putin just going again.
Yes, there is. And of course, he signed treaties before. In 1994, they signed a treaty for the independence of Ukraine and the sovereignty of its borders. They broke it 20 years after that by invading Crimea. There were Minsk agreements with France, Germany and Ukraine and Russia. Those weren't respected. 7 years after the Minsk agreements, Putin invaded the entire country. So it's got to be a durable agreement that will hold. And to do that, you're going to need some form of American underpinning, whether it's air policing.
That's the
crucial
isn't
point.
it? Because when he was asked about that in the White House, he said, well, you know, if you have US contractors on the ground, that'll sort of work. Now, the Europeans don't buy that. Zelensky doesn't buy that. How do you get round that basic problem that is what Donald Trump thinks are security guarantees, and the rest think that is nowhere near adequate?
Well, I'm with the president on this. I think that's a start. You've got America involved, underpinning its own minerals agreement, and you will have an American desire to make sure this agreement does stick. And I don't think the Americans are resisting negotiating on that and seeing whether they can strengthen that. They've said they won't put troops on the ground. We're already seeing how difficult that's going to be. Do you really want British and French troops in a position where they might have to fire on Russian troops if there's any kind of very local breach of the ceasefire line? So you're already seeing how difficult securing an agreement is going to be. But yes, we want the Americans involved, and that's what Zelensky, I think, has to go back to Washington and try and pin down.
You mentioned exactly what I was talking to Damian Grammaticus about, and he made the point that we're, in a sense, getting ahead of ourselves. But it is interesting because that exchange has happened today, that this plan about some sort of peacekeeping force, if there was a ceasefire, it is clearly being developed, and already you're seeing a really hostile response from Sergei Lavrov.
Yes, because the whole Russian thing is that NATO is somehow threatening Russia, and therefore if you have NATO troops right on the front line, it kind of validates the Russian position. So I'm quite sure if there is a reassurance force, they will be looking to non-NATO countries, perhaps Australian troops, from other parts of the world who might be prepared to come in and give that kind of reassurance. But I don't think this is going to be a line of Western troops eyeballing the Russian troops, as you see in the demilitarized zone in North and South Korea, for example.
Here's the thing. You were saying earlier that you support some of Donald Trump's strategy, but do you support the notion that he unilaterally, suddenly has stopped, paused military aid, stopped intelligence, the sort of thing that stops Russian missiles actually being intercepted that are falling every single day? In terms of that behaviour to an ally, do you support that?
No, I think that bit is regrettable. What he is doing is...
It's more than regrettable, surely.
Well, he's forcing a negotiation. That's what he's doing. And what he's making the Europeans realise is that Ukraine does not have the means to win this war. And the Europeans haven't had a plan to end this war. What the president wants to do is get people to the table to work seriously on how you end this war. Now, you might criticise the way he's offered some concessions in advance to Putin. It's unfortunate he's stopping the supply of intelligence. I don't think that'll be for very long, by the way. And I think pretty soon you'll find Zelensky back in Washington, getting round the table and sorting out how a ceasefire might work.
But every part of the pressure in the 6 weeks since he's been in the White House has been aimed at his ally, Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky. There has been nothing in terms of forcing any sort of concession out of Russia. How do you understand that strategy?
You can deplore that, but Trump's been very clear about that.
I'm trying to understand it.
Before he came back into office, he believes the key is to get Putin to the negotiating table. Now, you might not like his particular tactics, but Putin is at the negotiating table now. He's sent people to the first negotiation in Riyadh. They're coming back. They will be discussing where what arrangements can be made so far as the territory that they have already and whether they have to give that up again. And they will be party to an agreement that everybody wants to underpin.
A final thought and a broader thought about the state of the transatlantic alliance, because it's underpinned peace in Europe since the end of the Second World War. There are so many people in a variety of Western capitals genuinely concerned that we've reached a crossroads moment on that as well, that Europe has to no longer assume that America will come to their aid. Have we reached that moment? Is the new German Chancellor correct? Is Emmanuel Macron correct in what he was saying only last night?
No, I don't think we're at that point yet. America is still, and the President told our Prime Minister, is still committed to the Article 5 collective defence of Europe. But Trump and his people have been made clear for several months now, and even before they came to office, that their priority is to defend America against China. Now, I think what the European leaders have to do is to persuade America that it's in their interest to get Putin stopped and deterred from any kind of future invasion like this, if they're successfully to ask the allies to help when they're in a potential conflict against China. So these conflicts across the world, Ukraine, Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific, are all linked.
Michael Fallon, thanks very much for bringing us right up to date with your analysis in terms of what is going on in Brussels. We will return, obviously, to Brussels in the next few minutes. I want to break away from that to go straight to breaking news that Kyle Clifford, who admitted murdering Louise Hunt, her mother Carol Hunt and sister Hannah Hunt, you remember that terrible case. Well, he has now been convicted of raping Louise Hunt, who'd previously been in a relationship with him. Clifford had denied raping Louise before in July at the family's home in Bushey in Hertfordshire. Well, let's go straight to our correspondent Ben Schofield, who's at the court in Cambridge. And Ben, tell us more.
Well, yes, Matthew, and the details of this case have been distressing from the start. This, of course, goes back to that crossbow and knife attack that Kyle Clifford took out on the family of Louise Hunt last July, in July 2024, and he had admitted murdering Louise Hunt, his ex-girlfriend who was 25, her mother Carol Hunt, and her elder sister as well, Hannah Hunt. But he denied that he had raped Louise Hunt while she was restrained in their family home in Bushey in Hertfordshire. But after less than an hour's deliberation here at Cambridge Crown Court, the jury unanimously returned their verdict that he was guilty of that crime of rape as well. Now, that news was greeted by applause from the public gallery. Louise, Carol and Hannah's family have been sitting throughout this case in the public gallery. Carol Hunt is married to John Hunt, the BBC racing commentator, and he has sat there attentively listening to this evidence, which has at times been extremely difficult to listen to. A violent attack on his own family and that sexual attack on his younger daughter as well. Now, I'm told that the verdict was unanimous. As I say, they took less than an hour to reach their conclusions. Hertfordshire Police have told us that the scale of Carl Clifford's offending was unprecedented in terms of male violence against women and girls and was, they said, totally shocking. The background to this case is that Carl Clifford had met Louise Hunt on an online dating site. They had been in a relationship for about 18 months, but Louise had decided to end that relationship. She had described it as feeling like it was sucking the life out of her, that Carl Clifford had a nasty temper. See, she ended things at the end of July in 2024 after the pair went to a wedding in Yorkshire. That was the scene of some arguments and upset for the couple. She ended the relationship, and the prosecution's case was that that led to extreme anger within Kyle Clifford, and he decided to mete out this violent and sexual attack out of what the prosecution said was spite. The police said there was no wrongdoing by Louise at all. She simply exercised her right to end her relationship with Clifford as she was no longer happy. They described how in the days after that breakup, Carl Clifford began planning meticulously this attack. He bought items such as duct tape, a 10-inch butcher's knife and a crossbow online. And while going about his everyday activities, we saw him going to the gym in the days leading up to the attack. He met a friend in London and stayed overnight. On the morning of the attack, CCTV showed him visiting a garden centre with his mother, father and pushing his niece's pushchair. But on the afternoon of the 9th of July, he decided to go to Ashlyn Close, a quiet close in Bushey in Hertfordshire, where he murdered 3 members of the same family. And as we've just heard, a jury has concluded he also raped Louise in that final sexual act of spite, in the words of the prosecution. Matthew.
Ben, thanks very much. That's our correspondent there at the court. If you stay there, I'll be back to you in a moment, but I just want to play for you some more of the background to this terrible case. Let's get more from our special correspondent, Lucy Manning.
A family ripped apart by a man who terrorised and murdered them. Hannah, Louise and Carol Hunt, killed at the hands of what police describe as a cold, calculating murderer. Pictured after his arrest, the triple killer now also guilty of raping Louise Hunt while he'd restrained her for 3 hours.
Do you agree?
This was Clifford in custody in a wheelchair, refusing to answer questions, quietly replying no comment to everything.
Do you accept, Kyle, that based on the evidence, that this is a premeditated murder of 3 people? No. Do you accept that you have meticulously planned this murder from the moment that you split up Louise?
Upset only when questions were about a note he'd written to his family.
I don't want to experience new things. Nothing I can think of can make me happy. I know I could have gone to therapy.
The police found the packaging of the knife and the crossbow that he used to cause so much devastation. An ex-boyfriend whose response to rejection was to rape and murder. We now know he carefully planned his killings. This is Clifford in the black, buying rope, just 2 days after Louise Hunt, who he'd met online, broke up with him. Over a 2-week period, he bought petrol cans, the crossbow, duct tape and a knife.
Even at the time, it was incomprehensible. A year later, it still feels incomprehensible, the violence that was used and what those 3 women must have faced.
The morning of the murders, he carries on as normal, pushing his niece on a family visit to a garden centre, later driving to the Hunt's home, where he tricked his way in and stabbed Carol Hunt to death. He then waited in the house for Louise to come back in.
Louise is murdered at the point that Hannah, her sister, returns home, shot with the crossbow. Hannah then enters the house, but she is ultimately murdered in the same way with a crossbow.
During the attack, he texted Louise's father, John Hunt, using her phone to ask when he would be home. John replied to say, "Late, is everything okay, sweetness?" Clifford shot himself with the crossbow after police found him and is now paralysed. He was known to the police for cannabis possession and assault as a juvenile, but never charged. The level of pre-planning by Clifford to murder Hannah, Louise and Carol Hunt is shocking. But what is sadly unsurprising but no less devastating is yet again innocent women, the victims of male violence in their own homes by someone they knew. No escape from misogyny-fueled violence. Clifford bought the crossbow online, hiding it under a sheet. Questions will be raised about their easy purchase, but this is also about those who choose to use weapons to attack and murder women.
This is barbaric, entirely unprecedented, and a completely unnecessary use of violence simply due to a breakup that he should have handled better.
3 women, Hannah, Louise and Carol Hunt. John Hunt, who sat through the evidence, said previously, "I know my girls are with me at all times." Lucy Manning, BBC News.
Well, that news just coming in from the courts in the last few minutes, that breaking development. The triple killer Carl Clifford has been convicted of raping his ex-partner in that attack, which saw him murder her sister with a crossbow and their mother with a knife. That 26-year-old found guilty at Cambridge Crown Court. It took the jury only 45 minutes accepting the prosecution's case that the rape on Louise Hunt was a violent sexual act of spite. So those details coming in from Cambridge Crown Court here in the last few minutes. More on that as we get more reaction. Now let us pause.